Roger Williams University is hosting a crisis management seminar on May 3rd at their Providence campus. Crises, whether a natural disaster, cyber attack, or financial instability, can have severe repercussions if not handled properly. This is where crisis management plays a pivotal role. Join Roger Williams MBA students and expert speakers to learn how to prepare for the unexpected. The program is totally free and open to the public. You can register online at rwu.edu/events/crisis-management-symposium.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
This episode is brought to you by the University of Rhode Island Online, who are offering a cannabis certificate program. The legalization of recreational cannabis that went into effect last year can open doors for your career. If you are already in the industry or wondering what is the best path to break into the cannabis field, the University of Rhode Island has that program I just mentioned to help you become highly competitive in numerous areas of the cannabis industry. Fully accredited by URI's College of Pharmacy, their certificate program is 100% online, and it can be completed in just 2 semesters. The next application deadline for the summer 2023 session is April 4th, coming right up. Mark your calendars, right? Courses start May 9th. Learn more at uri.edu/online/cannabis or give them a call, 401-874-5280. Yeah, we've got whenever that announcement happens, the recording in progress announcement, I always think of like there must have been some lawsuit in like April of COVID where someone didn't know it was being recorded and somebody got fired or something like that. So now we're blessed with anytime I hit record on Zoom, it's recording in progress.
Yes, it's a consent moment.
It sure is. And I almost wonder if that voice should be on like every record that's made. You know what I mean? Like right before, like, all right, we're about to hit the bass for like the 6th time, and all right, recording in progress. See how far we can get.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to Inside Rhode Island Music here on the Bartholomew Town Podcast. It is a great pleasure to welcome the one and only Roz Raskin, Nova One, celebrating what will be a record that is highly anticipated. We'll use that terminology. Why not? I'm highly anticipating it. What has been put forth to the general public so far is amazing. It's the Nova One project, kind of next phase of it. It feels like it enters into a little bit more of like a shoegaze kind of expanded synth pop element, but it builds on. Anyway, by the way, I'm talking about like a short clip, so it's not like I've had an advanced copy of the record. But what I've heard, it's Nova One. Just here we go. Keeping it moving forward. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's a totally fair assessment. Always trying to evolve in some capacity, and I feel very fortunate that there are people close to me in my creative circle that help me to do that, to be a little bit riskier with things, to be pushing my own comfort zone out a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's so important for all artists because it's so easy to get, repeat something that was already successful or feel even sometimes you create limits for like, oh, this is what I do. And this is what seems to work. So let me just stay in this, I don't want to say box, but this area and just kind of focus on that. Your record's called Create Myself, this new record. I love that title. Where did that come from? And how did you get here? Like, where did this all start?
So let's see. So I put out my first LP for Nova One April 2020. So as you can imagine, it was absolute chaos. Any plan we had for anything was canceled, understandably. And so I guess I started writing pretty immediately after that. And had a bunch of ideas going. And then this record was mostly recorded, I don't know if I'm going to mess this up, but I think like at the end of 2020, 2021, maybe somewhat into 2022. this is not factual. I'm not on point with these dates, but it was something in that range. It was a majority of it was like during the heavy years of COVID, I guess
Mm-hmm.
you'd say, which is obviously still ongoing. And I realized during the writing process that a lot of the record is me talking to a younger version of myself. And so, and I don't know if you feel this way perhaps as an artist too, that sometimes you think you're writing about one thing and then you hear a tune back and you're like, this is about something else entirely.
All the
You know?
time. All the time that happens. And sometimes if I describe a song I'm working on to someone earlier in the process and say, oh, I think this is either about something or inspired by something, and then I amend that later on, sometimes you set yourself up for, well, wait a minute, I thought this was about X, Y, and Z. And it's like, no, you learn what the song is because it's coming from this really impossible to articulate place in the universe or somewhere out there that, I mean, we barely understand how a song goes from whatever it is before it comes out into the world. Like, we don't really have a scientific breakdown of that. So you're allowed to have, as a human being, unlimited flexibility as you try to understand what exactly is happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's almost like, it's okay for this, like your understanding of your own material and other people's understanding of your material to also be ever evolving, like what it means to you or what do you think it speaks to or whatever. Like it might even change for me again in 10 years. I might look back on this record and be like, actually, this is what I was talking about, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
All fair game. And so you mentioned that it was recorded what would be at minimum on the shortest version of the timeline a year plus ago. And that's some discipline because we're in terms of a release plan, because obviously I know you're on Community Records and there's a lot of, you have to really be in advance in from a logistical standpoint with getting vinyl created and coming up with an appropriate distribution plan and advancing singles. I mean, there's so much that goes into it. And that's like, that goes without saying. At the same time, there's also this culture of, hey, I made this song last night and I'm releasing it now. And we live in that era as well. And sometimes you see artists that emerge on TikTok, they release a demo on TikTok, and all of a sudden, like 2 weeks later, bam, they've put out that single on all platforms and they're kind of just going. Talk about the discipline to making something and doing it, quote unquote, the right way, and being patient with your process.
Yeah, I appreciate this question a lot because I think that there is value to all the ways of releasing material, you know? And I think that for me, it's important to have a period of thought after the thing is made to really visualize what it is that it's going to, like what the live show is going to look like, what the music videos are going to be like, any sort of aesthetic component. So I think that as much as I immediately want people to hear the new stuff, which I think like as artists, we're like, we made a thing, like, you know, I really want to show you the thing. It's also really important and challenging because I'm very impatient person a lot of the time with my own stuff, that I like really sit and marinate with the material to figure out next steps and how I want it to be rolled out, and then obviously all the things that you mentioned about the vinyl and the various plans that go into putting a record out in that way, having the physical distribution, communication with the label, communication with press people, all those things take that extra time. So, yeah.
Yeah, you've had some good success in terms of the press side. You were one of Brooklyn Vegan's songs we're into. Basically, I don't think that's the exact name of the column, but basically, and so landing in a place like that, you're able to communicate to an audience that's a wide audience, a global audience of frankly, consumers of independent or interesting music. So that in and of itself opens up a lot of doors where, look, it's not like you get a Brooklyn Vegan or frankly, even a Pitchfork review. And then like all of a sudden you're, riding around in Lamborghinis and like, buying mansions and things like that. I mean, let's be honest about it, but you take a huge step forward by having that patience and saying, look, I have a record. I'm sitting on it. Like you said, the art direction's been really considered. The tour is booked. The whole operation is ready to go in a way that if you just put it out 5 weeks after you finish recording, you probably wouldn't be able to achieve.
Right. And I mean, although, I think now that we're talking about it this in depth, I'm also thinking that there's something that I also really admire about the quick turnover. Sometimes, when you see someone release a fun idea for a song on a TikTok or something and it catches, and then they record the song and then it's streaming everywhere in 2 weeks or whatever, like there's something also kind of magical to me about that. And this is why I was saying, like, I think there's no real wrong way to put music out. I think that at least for this project, that level of time and thought is necessary, or was necessary for me. But I also feel attracted by this immediacy type of zone. And maybe that will be something I'll mess with at some point. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, it really, like you said, there's really no right or wrong way. But there are ways to sort of expand your reach if you're patient with it. So no question about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And and as impatient as I am, I waiting and really making sure that I'm thinking about all the things always makes me feel better in the end about how we're showing people the thing.
What do you think about Providence right now in terms of as a creative place to be? A lot of people moved here during the pandemic from New York or Boston. It's still growing. I still meet people all the time. They're like, oh, we heard about Providence. I work remotely or I quit my job or something like that. And it's so great. And then I'm always like, well, it is great, but if only you were here during, Fort Thunder, or if only you were here during like some of the other phases, you'd have a better understanding. But then, I mean, you could say that you could go all the way back to the beginning of time. Do you think Providence is in a good place?
So I think Providence musically to me is always in a really cool place, because I think that there's a lot of music that is, so there's varying levels of people being aware of different scenes of what's being created here at any given moment, and I think that they're in a lot of ways, I feel like so many things in this world are still recovering from the pandemic and during an ongoing pandemic. So I think that for a lot of musicians who are little freaks out here like myself, and who are maybe a lot of their social network was just going to a show and not making a plan to hang out with somebody. I mean, there's like so many of us weirdos who are like, okay, now my world is destroyed with COVID. And for someone like me, who on the inside I'm actually very shy, I was like a super shy kid, which people never believe me, of course, now. But I almost feel like there was periods of time over the past couple of years where I was like, God damn it, I worked for years to be less shy, to be less anxious, to be able to be out in the world, to create myself, if you will, in this particular way. And now I have to deal with not being able to exercise that muscle in the same way. And so I think that there's a lot of people that are still dealing with that. Like before the pandemic, I would sometimes go to like 2 or 3 shows a night.
Mm-hmm.
And like now I can't even fathom that kind of energy within myself. So I think that there's just still so much recovery going on, and a lot of trauma, if you will, and a lot of healing that needs to take place, and a lot of processing that's going on for people. So I just want to sort of say that that's like my general view of people. on like a human level. And then I think that there's really exciting music happening here. And I think it's that a lot of the scenes are still trying to, yeah, figure out what people's bandwidth is. Maybe bands that used to play every week in Providence are realizing they can't play every week in Providence. And mind you, this is coming from a place of back in the day, the Rice Cakes, when we first started, there was a time when we played Firehouse 13 4 times in a month.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Right.
it just was like
Definitely.
we were being offered shows and we took all the shows. You know, this is what
Yeah.
you do, right? But that's a really, it was hard to sustain then, and it's even harder to sustain now. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of really cool music being made here. It's just trying to figure out how to. I mean, it's also a hard time of year right now. Spring always feels a bit brighter. Always feels like there's more people in attendance, no matter what around here. But yeah, I feel like I'm hopeful, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
for the music scene here. And I think that from my perspective, the further down the road we go into the future, the more exciting the music scene is here. Because, for example, like there's way more of a queer presence here. There's way more. I feel like we're only getting more progressive and being more open-minded, I think, and giving more of a platform to folks that maybe didn't feel like they had one before or didn't have a place for their voice or any kind of representation, with a lot of the scene for many years here being very cis white dude dominated.
Yeah, a lot of guys in cowboy costumes, playing the same kind of music.
Absolutely. And in the same regard, a lot of white dude noise guys, like
Very true. Yeah.
And as rad as all these scenes are in their own right, like I feel like it feels a lot more inclusive to me now, even though I think it could still use so much more work, like I think it's the most inclusive feeling it's felt for me since I was a young person booking shows here. Like I've been booking shows since I was like 16, and back then no dudes wanted to play with me. It was like, I had to dig my way into anything. And anyway, changed a lot.
No, I completely agree with that. There is a lot of work to do. There's something that as a curator myself here at my loft and just in general, as somebody who, working on different projects and stuff like that, there's something that I want to bring more of, which is during my time in Brooklyn. And even now, I mean, I just played one of the most amazing shows I think of my life a couple of months ago in New York. And I was like the only white male guy with a guitar on the bill. It was essentially all hip hop and performance art and experimental. And that was the scene in Brooklyn that I experienced a lot of, where it was like a total cross-pollination of genres. It wasn't just like, all right, here's like 4 or 5 indie bands or here. And there was that, don't get me wrong. That certainly happened. And that's kind of in a lot of ways what the time I was in Brooklyn, that was like what was most well known were all these kind of multi phases of these indie bands that emerged. But in my world, there was this huge cross-pollination, and it still continues to this day. And like I said, a few months ago on New Year's Eve, I played a loft show in Brooklyn that was like completely packed, and the place was dead silent during my most like emotional, vulnerable moments, and raucous, and people were singing and clapping, and it was just the most incredible experience. And you don't get that here in Providence that much. I don't know if it's because like of the things you're saying about everyone's still trying to get their footing after COVID, which is totally true, but it does feel a little siloed. Like you don't get, as you go to a hip hop show or a noise show, or this group of friends that maybe these guys all hang out at Nolan's and they're all buddies, and like here's an offshoot of one band, and this guy also is the drummer in that band, and then there's the guys from Newport, and then there's the whatever it is. It feels very siloed, and I feel like we would be so well served to break down those walls and cross-pollinate, and suddenly everyone would not only be having more fun and around different genres, but I think everyone would get better because you're inspired by, for me anyway, I'm inspired by a performer, and I go, wow, what that person did, I'll never do that. I'll never do exactly what some of my favorite indie hip hop performers in Brooklyn do. I don't do that, but I can take a ton of their energy, a ton of their crowd approach, a ton of that feeling that I got from them and try to apply that. So it's almost like this healthier competition versus like two bands like, oh man, I wish we wrote a song like that. Well, let's go rip them off tomorrow or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that, so I suppose I like to think that there's more crossover than there is. And I think that you're right, that it does tend to feel more divided. Um, and you're also making me, so I do self-love shows and self-love records. And I've been booking shows, for years. You played my living room, Bill.
I did. That was an amazing show with
That was.
Ian O'Neill, I think Rafe,
Yes.
you.
Yes.
It was a crazy night because we had just moved up from Brooklyn. It was like, oh,
Right.
this was the right call to move here.
Yes, totally. I mean, that was a killer bill. That was a really killer bill. That was a really fun night. But with self-love, something that I used to do in my old studio was I would really purposefully put together what I felt like were really weird bills. And I just thought that even if it wasn't something that, it's like you hope people will go to other people's shows after that. Like I saw this band and then I decided I want to be a fan of that band, blah, blah, blah. But to me, it didn't matter so much. Like you hope that happens, but just really that you hope that in the moment that people feel the energy that you're talking about, which is like, I'm immersed in this show. I came here because I feel like the shows here are well curated and I know I'm going to like everything that's performed here tonight to some extent, or that I'll just be open to it. Maybe I won't like it. Maybe I'll at least be open to the experience of something I haven't seen before. And so you're reminding me to keep that mentality and that sentiment as I move forward to do more booking this year. Just how important that is, because I think that as much as people want to see like the same type of band play with their favorite band or whatever, I think it's cool to continue to challenge people and rock people as much as we can out here.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm trying to do the same thing myself, that where it's like, okay, how can we defy what is expected in this situation and, just sort of organically co-create with different people. And it's not easy. It's not as easy as just saying, sending an email and everyone's going to be psyched about it. So it's just something that it's a big deal, but it's like one of those things where it'll happen organically and people like you are aware of it and try to do the best you can. And I think you've done a great job of lifting up performers and concert goers, for lack of a better term. I don't know if concert goers, the show goers, people who want to be a part of a scene of all different backgrounds and experience levels, and making it inviting. Maybe you've maybe like 2 years ago you were, kind of trapped in a different mindset, and you were, you're a high school kid and you really haven't figured out who you are or where you want to be, and you're kind of like, someone gives you a hard time because you're not good at like basketball at gym class or something like that, and then you land in the right place, which oftentimes are the spaces that I think you and I both ended up in, and you're welcoming. You make it welcoming for people to find themselves, I think, through your music and through your shows. And I think that's such a great attribute of, you're also somebody through your teaching who has connected with a younger audience, and in that same context has been really welcoming to people who are trying to figure out who they are.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you for saying that. I mean, it's something that I am always trying to do and hope that I will always try to do, because I feel like ultimately it does feel like I'm healing an inner child or something. It's like I wished when I was younger that there were more people that were open to my music, or saw me as a young person and saw that I just really wanted to be a part of something. And I think also my work with Riot has been a good reminder of that. I actually just rolled off that board, but I've been volunteering with them for over 10 years. I was on that board for a long time. And I think that working with an organization like that, working with so many young people, even in, as you were saying, in my teaching practice, teaching for a long time, it's such a great continuous reminder of, like, really ultimately people want to be seen and heard and welcomed. And so I think that that's something that I try so hard to be a big piece of what I'm doing at all times, even, with all types of things in my life,
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
was a scared kid, like, and I wish more people had seen that and given me some warmth.
Yeah, I'm optimistic that I've gone into a handful of high schools over the last few years, but really over the last year. And I'll go in, there's a couple of charter schools that do a podcast, and it's like all the kids interview me, like they go around in a circle. Or like at the Met school, they put together a bunch of kids who like wanted to pursue music, and I came in and talked to them, and I was just like so relieved and so floored by, number one, the questions and the just sort of awareness of social issues and like dismissal of perceived authority. But then also, like, people are dressed like badasses, like fearlessly expressing themselves in a way that it happened when I was growing up. But I feel like the pushback was more significant, and a lot of people were like a little bit more timid to go all the way. And I'm relieved. I feel like Gen Z is just completely like, all those norms, we're not going to really worry about them.
Absolutely. It's so interesting that you say this, because I feel like, and I wonder if you have a similar perspective on this in some ways. So when I was growing up, like, the amount of media that I was digesting was so limited. It was like I got Teen Vogue, 17 magazine. There was this fashion company, Alloy, that sent me catalogs. Like that. Delia's, that was like a store in the mall, right? So it's like
Totally.
these were my. That's what I looked to think about trends and fashion and hair, whatever. And now I feel like, it seems like it's just so obvious. The internet, exists in this way where, like, there's access to so many things, and so the way that we think about style has expanded so much that it obviously already existed, but the way that you can think about living your life and expressing yourself feels limitless.
You completely nailed it. That is so true. And I never really thought of that. I mean, for me, it was like the Channel 10 News, the Providence Phoenix, WBRU and WRIU, and going to shows. And somewhere along the line, you're like at Newbury Comics, and you're like, oh, those shoes, Doc, are those the Doc Martin? Yeah, I need to be wearing those. It's part of, like, that. I got to. And like, you piece by piece, all of a sudden, like, you're 13, and like someone like is like, oh, nice shoes, dork, or whatever, when you get back to school, and then you start to feel like, yeah, nice narrow-mindedness. But it was like a very chipping away process, year after year after year, going to hardcore shows, and just, that's where a lot of like my style understanding came from. But you're so right, because you were bombarded. Like Teen Vogue is a perfect example, or just that what seemed like alternative media then, by today's standards, is like, it's like sitting there and watching the Queen of England's funeral for like 6 hours. It's like as mainstream as it gets, or whatever,
Right.
And things have really, really changed and opened up, and it's so important. It's such an important thing. And sometimes those trends can become dangerous, because you can create, like, I made a joke, and I've been making this joke a lot. Probably some of the listeners have heard me say this about the cowboy costumes. And I wore cowboy costumes during that indie folk period as well. And it's like you get sucked into this idea of like, okay, well, now the alternative universe is doing this thing, which at one point was like, all right, you're going to play indie folk. You know, there's certain bands that like had success from this area. So let's like emulate them as best as we can. And like wear certain, you know, try to like fit into a normal version of an alternative thing. But in this era, individual expression is much more exciting and is much more available for people because of, I think, exactly what you just said.
Yeah, that's yeah. And it's I also want to say I think that you rocked that look.
Well, thank you. I did grow up in the woods, and I did own the cowboy costume from the Washington County Fair since I was like 8 years old. So it's
Washington County Fair, what up?
That's it. I mean, I did grow up next to farms and stuff, so at least I had that going for me. But the one time I rode a horse, I was terrified. So I mean, let's be honest about it. But thank you. Yeah, but I think that there's a healthy balance, and we're heading in a direction that's more and more and more healthy, where people are, whether it's through the music they're making, whether it's just through the content that they consume, you're not forced to choose any one thing or any of the 5 things that are presented to you. You have almost an unlimited amount of options for what you can listen to for podcasts, where you get your news. It doesn't have to come from Channel 10 or, you know, the corporate curated news section. We have Uprise Rhode Island here in Rhode Island, and now people can go, oh, well, that issue is critical and no one else is talking about it. And now I have an identity of caring about this. So it's all these different things happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, we're just bouncing all over the place.
We're all over the place. Yeah.
I'm loving it though. I'm loving it. I'm like, where do we go?
Exactly.
Well, so first off, can I just ask you about the Washington County Fair? How many
Please.
years did you go?
Oh, I can remember going. I mean, I grew up down there. So the first one I went to, I must have been 5 or 6 years old. And I probably went every year I saw some of the best shows I've ever seen. Some of the country, I don't even know how you would describe them. There's this one show I saw, this guy, Leroy Parnell, who's like a slide guitar country singer. And I must have been like middle school or high school. And I was just like, whatever that was unfreaking believable. And so everything about it was like really exciting to me. And it actually helped me a lot from an empathy standpoint as Trump was emerging. And even to this day, you know, I think having an understanding of like the rural, even within a statewide basis, like the rural area of Rhode Island, there are things that people believe in that make them more in line with conservative politics that don't necessarily make them closed-minded, evil, or anything like that. It's like their environment was dictated their beliefs, and you can try to change some of them, and sometimes you have to. Like if someone's obviously bigoted in any way, that's like not what I'm talking about. Like even on like touchy issues like guns, where sometimes someone will be like, hey, don't you remember what it was like to live in the woods? We had all kinds of like coyotes and everything running. You know, it's like there are reasons why we need guns or personal protection. And it's like, oh, okay. And I think about the Washington County Fair and like the guy selling the deep fried Oreos, and like, what is that person's experience? It mirrors mine in some ways. It's much deeper into that world, but that definitely shaped my life right now. And I think it impacts my approach when dealing with issues, for sure, of certain issues. There's certain things that about rural Rhode Island that are terrible as well, that you know, where I grew up there was a hint at minimum of racism and a hint of closed-mindedness. And like, you know, I remember this one time where my guitarist and we were going up to Guitar Center or Daddy's Junkie Music in Warwick, one of the two. Like I don't know why, but I went to pick him up in Richmond, and I pulled in, and his dad ran out, and he's like, "Where are you guys going?" "Oh, we're going up to Guitar Center in Warwick." "Why are you guys taking all these trips up to the city?" I was like, oh, wow. Okay.
Wow. Yes.
So there was that. And like the Washington County Fair is a celebration of everything that is rural Rhode Island. And it's beautiful, but you also have to just be able to take a step back and go, okay, there are things about this that you have to escape from. Did you ever go to the Washington County Fair?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
several years. So I feel like we have some crossover here that I partially grew up in Matunic,
Oh, cool. Yeah.
because my parents have a place down there. So I think you're actually making me realize that I think that a lot of my understanding of sort of a larger portion of the state and the different areas and different cultures and how it all works, that any kind of understanding I have of that was definitely affected by the back and forth between going to South County, going to the Washington County Fair, then also living in Providence, going to public schools in Providence. Like I had a very, my experience was all over the place, and I think ways that have been very important for me to be patient with people, and also, you know, yeah, I think that there's a lot of people that live here in the city who have very little understanding of what we're talking about. Um, and, it's no fault to anybody. It's just like that just happens to be the experience that I had that I feel fortunate to have had. And Washington County Fair, it lives in such a warm, weird place in my heart. It's just like it's so what a wild zone.
I know it really is. It's exactly how I feel about it too.
But I also feel like it affected my musical experience too. So my dad is really into women country performers. So he was like psyched to set up some chairs, and also for anybody that doesn't know what the Washington County Fair
Oh
is
yeah,
that
yeah.
is
We're
listening
just
to this right
exactly. Hopefully you're Googling if you're not driving, but yeah, it's this multi-day event in Richmond, Rhode Island. That's a typical county fair. They've got rides. They've got a country concert every night. There's actually two stages. There's a main stage and a smaller stage. There's the what do you call it? Is it the midway? At a carnival where you walk through and they've got the games, but there's also these beautiful events that like they're so beautiful in a way, like the tractor pulls and like all these like farmer like skill competitions. They're like powerful events. Like when you watch it, you're like, whoa, like that's so much love and identity that goes into those events. And so they're happening, and yeah, it's this crazy event.
I also, so I am afraid of a lot of rides. I'm somebody who, I went to Six Flags once with a group of friends, and I went on one ride and thought I was going to die. So then I just sat out and watched everybody else, which, to be honest, was actually entertaining in itself. To watch a bunch of people screaming their heads off, I was like, all right. But the first time I ever went on a roller coaster, a small one that I enjoyed, was at the Washington County Fair, and it was the Bon Jovi
Oh yeah,
roller
totally.
coaster. Do you remember? It was like
I
in the far
definitely do.
corner, and it had this like spray painted Bon Jovi, and it's just like wow. And it was little, and it was perfect for me, and I just loved riding that thing around and
Yeah.
around and around. Anyway.
I know I'm with you on the rides. I'm actually shockingly, I'm going to Disney World this weekend. I haven't been there since I played there in my high school marching band, but I've got young nieces and nephews, and it's my mom's 70th birthday, and that's what they wanted to do. So I'm flying down there, and I like made this like statement on like a Google Duo call or whatever. I was like, I don't do rides, just so you know. Like I'm not doing Splash Mountain or whatever. I think that's closed now, but I don't do rides because I'm the same way. I'm like, the risk reward for me, even in the sense of just like scrambling my stomach for a few hours, it's like, it's not there. Like
Not
put me
worth
in a
it.
spaceship, let me go to Mars or even just like low Earth orbit, and maybe the risk reward's there. But yeah, I don't need the log flume anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I mean, I know that, it was also influenced by, like, I think that my dad is better with that stuff than my mom is, but I remember being on do you know those rides where it's like a simulation ride? You know what I mean? It's like you're
Yep.
in like a chair and then you got the screen going, right? So when we were in Disney, I think we went on like maybe a Star Wars ride like that, and I was sitting next to my mom, and I remember her like holding on to me for dear life while we're in that kind of ride. So like I just was like, are we in trouble here? Like,
Yeah.
is there a chance I could get hurt here? So, I mean, anyway, so I come from a mixed family experience
Hmm.
of rides too. But yeah, I'm all set with feeling completely out of control on a contraption in the middle of the air.
Definitely.
No
Just in
thanks.
just in general, I feel in general like I don't know. I'm not 100% there, but like I've been trying really, really hard. In the beginning of the pandemic, I was going to all these press conferences and like they'd have like some general stand up and be like, here's what's going to happen if like it gets worse. We're going to like do this, that, and the other. And you're like, oh my God. And I started to have these insane, for the first time in my life, insane panic attacks, like completely debilitating. Was it tied to the pandemic? Probably was influenced by it, but it was like a wake up call of like, I want full control of myself and whatever external factors, I'd already quit drinking, but admittedly I was smoking weed a lot. And it was like, all right, what happens if I eliminate that? What happens if I go vegan? What happens if I really make sure I get enough sleep? What happens if I hydrate? What happens? And like doing that has been really helpful. And now I'm at a point where I'm like, yeah, I don't want to go back to any feeling of loss of control, of complete control ever again. And it honestly has helped my music. My writing has never been more clear in terms of getting into the space and being like, okay, great. I can extract this song and go from point A to point B and revisit it knowing that if I like it, if I like what I hear on my voice memo, it's probably I really like it, not just that my brain is spun out or I'm like, okay, cool, I wrote something. Now I can move on. And so anything now that takes me out of that comfort zone is terrifying to me. I don't have any interest in it.
Yeah, I feel that so much. I quit drinking. I think it was now like almost 4 years ago. I'm forgetting, but and ever since then, I feel like I'm just constantly in the highest high of my life. It just sort of like I'm so present, and I become way more sensitive to things. Like, are you now more sensitive to things like caffeine at all? I'm just
Oh,
curious.
totally. I quit drinking soda and like I totally am.
Yeah.
I'm so sensitive to even I can feel when I take Advil.
Yes, right, right. But like,
Like
but like right now I'm drinking decaf, and
yeah.
when I and like I'll very occasionally drink fully caffeinated coffee, and it rocks me. You know
Yeah,
what I
it's all
mean?
you're all buzzed up like,
Yes, right. And I think that I was also realizing I went on a tour in 2019. This was around the time that I was giving up alcohol, and I was realizing that at some of the shows that my hand was really jittery. And so and then I realized that the caffeine wasn't working out, and so then and it helped a lot to just drink some like decaf tea early on in the day instead. So yeah, I feel you on wanting to feel the most in control that you can. I was actually just talking to a buddy the other day who was also alcohol free, and I was saying how so separately from all this music stuff, I've been going through a lot of personal grief, and recently I was like, man, it would be so nice to have a glass of whiskey, like because I remember the feeling of the edge that it took off to just have that in my life.
Yep.
And then I sat there for a moment being like, there will be no reward for me though. I know that. Like, I know that I will ultimately feel worse if that is the choice that I make. You know what I mean? And that I will feel less in control of my emotions, of my interactions with other people. Like, there's no benefit for me specifically with involving that kind of substance in my life right now. And you reminded me that that's a big reason why. It's like I just want to feel like I'm in my body, like I know what's going on with my body. I don't like that feeling of not knowing.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. No question. I also, for the first time in a long time, and for the first time effectively, started doing I do this. It's with this person in Brazil. So it's like it's what would you call it? Not telemedicine, but I work with somebody in a therapeutic context that also involves really using your body. So once a week, it's not just like pouring through emotions, but I do like these incredible stretches and dances and punches and shaking. And this is something I started during the pandemic as well. And that has been so powerful. And just revisiting things that were traumatic, that were exciting, and living with those. And so that work has been so important to me that I also don't want to squash that. Like, what's the point of doing that work and getting to a place where I'm like, you know what? I recognize X, Y, Z were traumatic experiences. And I recognize that these other things were really positive experiences. So let me fully live them, maybe for the first time ever. And now I'm like, yeah, and as an artist, it impacts my work so much in little subtle ways. It's not like I can go, okay, great. I did this work and now I wrote this song or I had this performance. It's just opening up the portal more and more and more and just being more relaxed in the role, in the life, and in the creator mode, so to speak. And I don't want to mess with that.
Absolutely. That sounds incredible. First off, is that a specific type of therapy?
Yes, it is. And I can't believe I don't know the name off the top of my head. I know it. Like, it's like one of those things I know. I've been like searching for it the last like 30 seconds. Like, why do I not know it? Yeah. It is very specific, and there's different levels of it. And in fact, there's someone here in Rhode Island, in Newport or Middletown, who she teaches this in these in-person classes where there's like 6 to 10 people in the class. And this person's like a world-renowned, just randomly is in Rhode Island, one of like a handful of world-renowned experts. And I remember taking the class in person years, like 5-6 years ago, and being like, yeah, I don't do this. This isn't me. Like, not me. And now it's the total opposite, where I'm like, no, this is so important.
Yeah. Well, I was actually just talking to James, who, for those of you that don't know who this person James is, James Parker is an engineer at Big Nice Studio, which is where Bill and I have both recorded. But we were just talking the other day about, I mean, things that, seem like at this point, like so many people are aware of, but until you start doing it yourself, you're like, oh my God, this is a thing. But just moving your body, just how much that really alters so much of how you move through the world, truly. And so he's been doing a lot of skateboarding. And I mean, there's like a multitude of reasons why that is so great for him mentally and physically. But yeah, and it's, just leaves you feeling accomplished and feeling like you're building strength, and like it seems so basic, but just being able to feel like you understand the way that your body functions or something, or how you're breathing, or, all these things. It's really
it's
magical.
Huge. It's so huge. I agree. And I was like so lazy for so long, and really was feeling it physically, emotionally, and have been trying to like do something movement oriented every day. Maybe it's a walk. Maybe I'll like drive to South County, like go to Matunic or go to Narragansett and do a long walk. Maybe it's like an exercise bike, or bought a jump rope, or maybe I play drums in 2 bands. So I have 2 rehearsals per week on drums. And so all these things, you're totally right. Exercise and physical well-being aren't necessarily part of the artist's, it should be, but it isn't necessarily part of the artist's practice, or it isn't emphasized. When you're an athlete in high school, you are extremely engaged in weight training or running or whatever it is. Like, here's your diet, make sure like that's all coached. And as a musician in the school band, for me, playing drums in the jazz band and the marching toms and the timpani and all that, no one ever once said stretch, eat well. It just wasn't there. And then I started playing in actual bands, and like you show up at the living room to play your first show, and you're like, your parents drop you off at the Dunkin' Donuts out front, and you're like, it's the furthest thing from exercise and diet that you could possibly imagine. But I think it should be something that artists think about, because you can gain a real advantage from having the temple that contains your soul and is essentially the transmitter, the antenna for all these crazy experiences that come with creating the subconscious unknown thing. Like, you can be better equipped to make better art if you take care of yourself. And I wish I'd learned that earlier, because, I don't feel old. I also paused my age when the pandemic hit. That's something else. Like, I don't identify with the age that I am right now. I consider myself 3 years younger, like, in all seriousness. But I wish I had known this like 15 years ago, because I probably would have made better art.
Yeah, I hear you. There's definitely so much to be said for what also just becomes accepted norms within music making. I feel like it's so cliche to say, but like the sex, drugs, rock and roll type of mentality. And yeah, and it has such an influence over people. And it's sort of like sometimes like, where do these things even come from, that is how we think it's supposed to go, or how we're supposed to be doing things. I took this yoga class for many years where I think I was really the youngest person in a group of like 5 or 6 women, all of which were, for the most part, over the age of 50. And it was this really wonderful class that was taught by my friend's mom, Julie Van Noppen, who, by the way, anybody out there who's looking for a transformative bodywork experience, she's incredible, absolutely incredible. It really taught me how to breathe, like legitimately breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I think it allowed me to become a better singer and understand my voice better.
Yep.
So for that alone, I'm thankful,
Yeah. Being able to be more in command of your breath and speaking voice and singing voice is a gift that you can give yourself, no matter what.
Absolutely.
If you're a performer professionally or on a semi-professional level, or even just anybody. Really, really important stuff.
Absolutely. Also, I also want to highlight too that I was mentioning the age difference between me and most of the people in this class, because I think that that's something else that I just think is so important, is to know people from all different ages and share space with people from all different ages, and just how it is so important for our personal development to understand what came before us and what is going to be continuing after we pass. That was another piece of that class that was so amazing. Like I showed up one day, it's like a 9 a.m. class, I think, and I was just sobbing. I was breaking up with my ex-partner. I was just absolutely just devastated, in pain. We were going through this just incredibly difficult separation, and I still just love him so much. And it was just so hard. And I had zero control. I was just sobbing through this class. And all the people that were there were just, they're all 30 years older than me or whatever. And just giving me the most like wonderful, I don't even know if advice is really the word, because it wasn't like unsolicited advice. It just was sort of like just reminders of like, it really does take time and it will pass,
Yep.
And just like seeing all of these people that have been through so many years of living on this planet, who have been through similar experiences and are in like such a cool place in their lives, and that kind of interaction was so important to me, and still feels like I feel really lucky to have shared space with all those people.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. And I totally agree with that. And it reminds me of something else I wanted to ask you about. Maybe ageism in music.
Sure. Yeah.
Some of it, it's something that's in my head a lot. But then I think about, like, as an artist, the people that I most admire for the most part are either about my age or maybe even were a little bit further down the line when they hit their stride. But that it's something that I also to be completely honest, like I said, oh yeah, I kind of like still consider myself in my mid 30s, which I'm 38. So if someone asks me how old I am, I just say I'm in my mid 30s because of COVID, because I feel like, but the idea of being a performer in on a full-time basis and developing something, still expanding, still reaching for that big audience, that wide audience, that casting that wide net, and not being like 22. It's one of those things that I go back and forth on in my head. It's like, it really hurts me sometimes to think about, did I miss a window? But then I go, well, of course not. There's no window. That's complete nonsense. And I'm not even talking about in like an industry, from an industry standpoint, like not even in the Mindy, like the major indie like labels or anything like that, but like from just like a creative standpoint. What's your take on that? Because you've been at this for a while and you continue to grow and evolve. And I feel like you're coming into yourself, like in a way you're starting to really crest now. I mean, I love the Rice Cakes. I really did. And I love the first Nova One record, but what I heard of your first single teaser, what I've seen of your art direction and like kind of how you've just built this thing that is very real, it shows me that like you're just starting to hit your stride now. Is that fair?
I really appreciate that. I mean, I suppose I feel like that. So I'm glad that that is something that you're taking away from it. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like, wow, what a fucked up society that we live in, that the older you get, people devalue you in a myriad of ways. And then also, I mean, I think I mean, so intersectional, right? So it's like for non-men, it's like after you're 40 years old, will you ever be hot again? And if you're not hot anymore, do we even want to listen to anything that you have to say? Like, if I don't deem you attractive to me anymore, then maybe I don't care, and so I feel like there's a lot of that that I feel so complicated and sad about. But I think ultimately for me right now, yeah, I think I'm really trying to come from a place of remembering why I'm still doing it and why it's so fun for me. And it's also something that I have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've always felt that way, but I think right now I'm making what feels like the truest music to myself that I've ever made, because I just have a better understanding of myself. So I think that it's still fun for me and it's still exciting for me, and I'm really trying to continue riding that as much as possible. And yeah, it's a great question, and I think that ageism in all facets of this world is just so beyond fucked to me. I'm sorry if I'm. Can we?
Oh no, it's all that I will, if needed, I will bleep it, or I'll pay the fine to the FCC if that section airs on WPRO.
Like, bleep, 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 and I
exactly,
bleep, bleep, bleep.
Exactly. We'll just load it up for a few minutes here.
Well, so it's definitely really powerful. It's definitely really powerful. I played. I think that you'll appreciate this story. That I played a house show with a friend of mine, and I won't even say how many years ago because I'm gonna leave myself ageless.
Yeah.
But we were playing a house show in Philly, and my friends and I at the time were 30, and we're in the middle of the kitchen, and the show's about to start, and we're listening to some people talk, and I become aware of a person who's 17 who's there, who's playing in the band that's opening the show. And I forget what it was that they're yakking about, but we're all kind of, chumming it up or whatever. And someone said something sort of ageist. And my friends and I are in the Nova One costumes that are also kind of, when we're dressed up in the full garb, I think it's a lot harder for people to determine how old we are,
Sure. Because you're wearing wigs, matching wigs, and everyone's sort of in a androgynous, wigged uniform type of look. Yes. It's really cool.
Yes. So for folks that don't know, in my band Nova One, we all dress in this costume, and it's pretty much the same costume, and it's just like Bill described. And so I turned to this group of younger folks, and I said, well, I'm 30. And their jaws dropped. They were like, no, you're not. Someone just like said that out loud, and I said, no, I am. I'm 30 years old, and I'm playing this house show tonight. And they were like absolutely stunned. And they were like, show us your license. We don't believe you that you're 30 years old. And I was like, well, I'm like wearing this costume right now, And I said, well, actually, she's 30 as well. My friend who was playing the show with me. And they were like, no, you're not. There's no way in hell that the two of you are 30. And it was like, and I said, there's a lot of people out here of all different ages who are still doing the thing, and also correct. 30 to me looks nothing like I thought it was going to look, or feels nothing like I thought it was going to look. I was like, 30 is the best I've felt in my entire life. 30 rules. I didn't say this, but 17 sucked.
Yeah, 17, it does suck.
And like it actually, miraculously, with all the ageism that exists, getting older in a lot of ways for me ends up feeling so much better for myself. And I was like, I'm the hottest I've ever been. I'm 30. It freaking rules, like this is, I'm telling you, it just gets better. And I think that everybody was just sort of like, what the hell is going on here? And I realized how insular in that moment, even the DIY worlds can feel, right? And how many assumptions people make, and so many spaces that are deemed more progressive than other spaces, or more leftist than other spaces, when like a lot of the time, a lot of those spaces are just as limited as anything else, and so anyways, it was very funny.
Yeah.
And there was just a lot of continued shock, and just sort of like, wait, so you've been like touring and doing this for like 13 more years than I have. And I was like, yeah, and like, it's actually not that wild too. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. I completely understand that and agree. And I think there was a moment, it's been a while now, but there was a moment where, after doing a ton of DIY touring and even a little bit like one step up from that as an opener, that in fact, this particular tour I'm describing, I was opening up for a band that ultimately was signed to a pretty well-known label. They ended up doing pretty well. And I was opening for them, and we played in Buffalo, and it was a pretty good show. I mean, I can't remember the name of the venue, and it was pretty good. Like I walked out there were people there. It was like, this is magical. I'm playing my songs. I was playing solo on stage. And then we stayed at somebody's house. And I remember waking up on a floor in Buffalo in January, ice cold, looking around and I was like, this isn't sustainable. This isn't sustainable. And it was then that we actually moved to Rhode Island to like try to kind of recalibrate things. And from there, that really was kind of the first seed that planted like, all right, let's do this. Let's find this podcast radio thing that can sort of balance things out so we don't have to do this only. But that might be like where, at least for me, there was a point where it was like, I can't do that 200 times a year. I can't wake up on this guy's floor 200 nights and like be confused. Where am I? Can I leave and go get coffee? If I do, am I locked out and it's like 6 degrees out? So things like that changed. But overall, I think I'm way more confident as a performer now. And I think I have way more to offer, or at least as much to offer as any other point in my life. And I try not to care about it. And it's just one of those things that's like, it still bugs me a little bit. And I'm just working to try to get over it. And I think every one of us should, because imagine if it was in like medicine or science, people were like, well, you know what? We're going to listen to the up and comers that are like 22 and anybody over the age of 35, you guys can take a hike. I mean, sometimes someone comes along and challenges norms and they're like 15 and you're like, wow, you're a genius. And what you just did or said is actually more enlightened than anybody else has ever said before. And you're one of those rare geniuses that will sort of like accept as the new standard. But for the most part, what other world besides certain aspects of the arts and professional sports, which is really in and of itself part of the entertainment industry, does that notion of like the older you get, the less valuable you are make sense? And it just doesn't. So I'm glad that was almost like a personal question, because it's like something as I'm about to embark on a new record, I'm like, where are we going? And I'm like, I want to go more than ever before. Like maybe not sleep on a couch in Buffalo every night again, but let's do a European tour. Why not?
Abso-freaking-lutely. Yeah, I think, I love this conversation because I think it's also important for people to, like it seems so obvious, but I feel like it's not spoken about enough. I mean, like so many discriminatory things that we see in all the scenes, I think that there's so many things that could be talked about more.
Definitely.
Whether it be racism, I think it needs to be, just such a continuous conversation that I feel like sort of waxes and wanes, and I wish was really more at the forefront of a lot of continued discussion. I'm excited for your new record.
It's going to be interesting. I'm excited because the last record I did, I put out a bunch of songs that I had written in some cases like 20 years before, like when I was like early high school, things that had never gotten recorded or I didn't like it. And it was more of like a challenge to myself. Like, let's just make a record, play all the instruments, see what happens. Like I know how to record, but recording yourself alone in a room for 2 months at straight is different than engineering somebody else or producing somebody else or making like a quick track or recording a podcast or something like that. So it was a good challenge. And I got that out of the way. And I was actually talking with somebody, I'm sure, Ziggy Coffey from the Z Boys. He's another great artist. We
love Ziggy.
Yeah. We lived together and we were talking about it, and he was like, oh man, I'm so glad you got that record done, because now it clears it out. And all the new stuff that's coming is like, oh, that's the version of me that I've been waiting for a long time. And it took making a record of old songs and things that felt incomplete and sort of like playing catch up post another band that I was in, Silverteeth, which was dominated like the 5 years of my life in a great way. It was awesome. But now moving into this solo space, this is the first time I'm actually like all new music, all things that have been written like in the last 6 months. And it's such a refreshing and exciting place to be in. And there's no expectation of anything. It could be, who knows what it's going to be. I don't know what name I'm going to release it under. I have like a wall over here of like 50 different project names. I might use my own name still. I don't know what I'm going to do. That's so exciting. And that's a great place to go into a project on, because like talking with Brad at Big Nice, who I know you worked with extensively, and for the listeners, Big Nice is an amazing studio in Rhode Island, Northern Rhode Island. I actually just did a profile on him for PBS, which is kind of hilarious because he was such a handsome lad on camera doing his thing.
Oh,
but
I bet. Cute.
but like talking with him, it's like, you know, I'm just so excited about where this is going. And his approach was like, yeah, I think you're going to be able to do most of this by yourself still, and I'll be there for you when you need it. And so it's a different approach to me than I've ever done before. I'm on my own, but I still have somebody who's a phone call away. And if I need to track something in the studio, he'll be there. But I'm excited. I don't care about my age. I don't care about anything. Like, I'm like, whatever. Like, this is what I've wanted to do for years and years and years. I finally have the gear I want for the most part. I finally have the time I want. And why would I not do it? Just because there's somebody's going to tell you, oh, well, you're not, the guys from this band or the people from this band are like 22 and, you're older than them, so you shouldn't. Like, what? No way.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to think, too, that because of what we were talking about earlier with, like, the expansion of how people are absorbing content, if you will, there's an audience for freaking anything out there, you know? So it's like, you might as well be making it if it's fun for you to make.
Totally.
Yeah.
Roz Raskin, they are one of the leaders of the Providence music community, have been for a really long time, and just a great artist. You're a great artist, and I'm really excited for you that Nova One is continuing to kick ass. April 22nd at the Columbus Theater is the Providence release show. You've got a tour around that, a great tour, like, if I may, an enviable tour, like the perfect, like your tour routing is like exactly how I like to do things in terms of the right places with the right people and the right dates. Very impressive. That's not easy to do. You can pre-order the vinyl, which looks beautiful. And I would encourage everyone to go and follow you on Instagram and on Spotify and put the songs on repeat. So Roz might be able to make 7 cents after you stream it 5,000 times.
Please, I need those 7 cents. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a admirer of your work and your voice in the community, and the way that you're on the cusp of so many things and so present, and bringing also awareness to so many things for the creative community. Thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for having me on.
I appreciate it. I'll see you soon, if not before April 22nd.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.